So, my exams just ended yesterday, and to say the least, this semester has been draining both mentally and mentally. Yes, you heard that right. At certain points, I felt like I was burning out and that information was just not getting into my head. And I realized that was because of my methods. For this entire year, I've been constantly reflecting on my study methods and trying new things out to see what works. For context, my school has 3 semesters a year, and at the start of every semester, I would work out a study plan or a study system, but the outcome was never actually what I had in mind. Don't get me wrong, I did see a substantial improvement in my GPA, but it wasn't until this semester when it finally clicked in my head. If you want to jump straight to the video, here's a timestamp, but I'd like to share a story. So before I came to university, I focused a lot on learning how to learn. Back in secondary school in JC, I experimented a lot until I found something that worked, which was mind maps. Of course, I started applying it to whatever it was I was learning, whether that was school stuff, books that I'm reading, or online courses. And before starting university, I was confident that this would be my weapon, my magic wand that would allow me to become one of the fastest learners in my class. I was wrong. It turns out that university is a completely different ballgame, and at the very first semester, I figured out something just wasn't working. I was struggling and I realized that there were so many details and content that I was missing out on, and I couldn't really figure out why. I said, okay, maybe I'll try harder next semester. I increased my focus, I stick to mind maps. My grades did get better, but not substantially. And like I said, I try a lot of different study techniques. So temporarily, I decided, okay, I'm going to ditch mind maps. And ironically, the day I decided to do that was the day everything just finally clicked. It was such a random moment of enlightenment for me, but it just made sense. So here are all the mistakes that I've made this year and everything that I've learned about learning. And I try to organize this in a way that makes it easier to understand. Number one, stop relying on artificial intelligence to analyze or connect the dots for you. I thought it would be helpful to write down the point as I was speaking, but now I realize I gotta flip the video. Let's do that now. Okay, so for the first 2 semesters, I relied so heavily on artificial intelligence to analyze my lecture slides, to break it down, and to teach it to me. And I also asked it for help with mind maps. So, you know how study advice on YouTube would generally ask you to look through your lecture notes or do some form of priming just so that when you do go for the actual lecture, the content just becomes a lot easier to absorb. I tried that, but using ChatGPT. I told it to prime me for my lectures using the 80-20 rule, and it just didn't work for me. It might work for you, but it didn't work for me. And then later on in my study process, I would ask it to extract keywords which I could then use to build a mind map instead of doing it myself. Point is, we don't realize how much we are offloading these important mental processes to these AI tools, and we are actually making learning harder for ourselves by reverting more towards rote learning. I read this book quite a few years back called How We Learn, and one of the principles that the book mentioned was that if you want to learn effectively, you have to interact with the material. And this was long before ChatGPT was a thing. But ever since ChatGPT came along, we've stopped thinking and just started blindly accepting whatever it gives us. I've seen people who don't even think anymore. Like, no offense, but even for the simplest of tasks, they would ask ChatGPT to do it for them. So if you do want to improve your cognitive processes and your ability to link stuff, please reduce your AI usage as much as possible in your study process, at least. To my future self, if you're watching this, or anyone who needs to hear this, I'm sure that in your reality, AI is a lot more advanced, but I just want you to remember that the tough work up here will pay off infinitely more in the long term. Also, if you haven't realized, most AI tools can't access your PDFs at least 100%. especially if it contains images like our lecture slides. So if you're thinking of tossing your lecture notes into ChatGPT and asking it to do the work for you, I'm sorry, that's just not going to work. It has limitations, and that has killed me a few times in my exams, but I learned the hard way. So yes, TLDR, don't rely on AI too much. Number two, compartmentalization. Okay, so I just said that you shouldn't be relying on ChatGPT to do the priming for you. So what's the better method? I wouldn't say the right method, because sometimes in studying there is no right or wrong. It just works for you or it doesn't. How I've been doing it lately is that before the lecture, I would look through my lecture notes, identify the headings, the subheadings, and try to create some kind of hierarchy. So, for example, let's say I'm studying about the ankle. I would look through my deck of 150, 170 slides, and I would try to compartmentalize them into different categories. It's about finding the patterns or finding the commonalities. So I realized that I could categorize some of the conditions as ligament sprains or some as fractures or impingements. Compartmentalizing from the get-go will make information a lot easier to absorb. And it will also allow you to retain the big idea. Now, let's talk about revision. Obviously, you can't remember everything you've read, and this is a problem that I faced quite a bit this semester. I would study something, and then 2 or 3 weeks later, when I would revisit it, I realized that I'd forgotten 80% of what I had studied. So, when it comes to doing the revision, I'm kind of starting afresh, but if I was focused during the lecture, the retrieval part gets a lot easier. So how would I approach it? Again, I would look through my deck of slides and extract the keywords. If you've already done it, great, you save some time. Extracting the keywords would give you an overview, and you can start thinking about how you want to allocate your time. What are the topics that need more work, and what are the topics that you already kind of know about? This will help you save time when you're revising, but if you do have extra time on your hands, by all means, go deeper on the topics you already know about. And once you're done with that part, how I would do it is I would start going slide by slide, looking through the references and doing a deep dive into whatever the slide is trying to teach me. I try to make sense of it until I'm satisfied, but you kind of have to be smart with it. Otherwise, you'll be burning a lot of time. If it isn't making sense, move on, come back to it later. And something like Notion really helps with that. So whenever there's a topic that I wish to come back to later, or something that I don't quite understand but I don't have the time to dive deeper, I would highlight it and I would leave a comment saying, come back to this later. This organizes my learning and helps me be smarter with my time. Number 3, study technique doesn't actually matter. I know this is a very confusing statement because a lot of people, including myself, tend to think that there's only one way to become an academic weapon, as they say. Like there's a certain study method or a certain study app that if you start using like Anki or Notion, you'll suddenly become a genius. Here's the truth. It does not matter what study platform you use. At the end of the day, what matters is how much of the concept have you broken down? What have you done to make it simpler for you? Pick a method that forces you to interact with your material and forces you to think. I've seen people who draw mind maps on their iPad, myself included, who take notes on paper, who turn everything into flashcards, who throw everything into OneNote or Notion or something similar, turn their content into a podcast and listen to it, and even use Microsoft Excel for studying. All of them are top scorers in their respective classes and their respective fields. They all have different methods, but the same outcome. What counts is the mindset and how much you actually understand. You can spend 5 hours making colorful notes and yet not understand anything because you're not interacting with the material. Thinking is the important part. You should feel it up here. That's what counts. Like I mentioned earlier, for 2 semesters, I insisted on using mind maps, even though somewhere deep down I knew it wasn't working for me. Now, if you know Dr. Justin Sung, he would say that if mind maps isn't working for you, you're doing it wrong. There is no way that if you use a mind map in the right way, it won't work for you. But you know what's the puzzle piece that I was missing? Thinking. Archer Newton, another learning coach whose video I had to watch 3 times to understand it, kept stressing on the point of concepts only. But instead, what I was focusing on in my practice was copying information over from my lecture notes and organizing it rather than thinking. That's also the reason why my mind maps were messy and I kept running out of space. If there's too much extra information, I'm sorry, the mind map will lose its effectiveness and you've essentially wasted your time. The moment I decided to stop making mind maps was the moment when all these points that I just mentioned magically clicked in my head. I realized that if I were to push mind maps further down my study process, it would be a lot more helpful. And guess what? It worked. Dr. Justin's tip about less on paper means more in the mind suddenly made sense. So, if I wanted to push back mind mapping, what would be the replacement? Turns out that linear notes can actually be helpful. Again, if you watch Dr. Justin's song, he would report me if he were to see this. But given the nature of university exams, I've had this newfound appreciation for linear notes. I would like to address though that Dr. Justin Sung's dislike for linear notes is justified. That's because, for one, it's the most common study method, and just because it's common doesn't mean it's effective. Secondly, linear notes mostly involve copying over information from your lecture notes or what the lecturer is saying and postponing the thinking to a later stage, which, like I said, is passive. But if you combine thoughtfully written linear notes with other study methods, it could make understanding information a lot faster. It can be a powerful tool for analysis. So, how did I come to this conclusion? Like I said, when I revisited my lectures, I seem to have forgotten most of it. So even if I were to turn it into a mind map, I no longer remembered what was my thinking process like. What led me to drawing certain arrows or making certain connections. Linear notes gives me a platform to put all my thoughts, my research, and my analysis into one place. And now, since I'm making my mind maps after analyzing the lecture rather than before, I can throw my mind map into my Notion and it just complements each other. So, linear notes are like the manual and mind maps are how this manual connects to other manuals or the topics from this manual connects to other topics in the course. I know some of you may mention the forgetting curve or going back to your content every 1 day, 1 week, 1 month or so. Practically speaking, when you have 3 to 4 lectures in a week plus other commitments and some of us have work in university, that's actually not possible. I did try it out. I did try setting reminders for when I was supposed to revisit my stuff. But when it came to actually doing it, I didn't have the time because there was new content that I needed to focus on. So having linear notes, especially if you have those drop-down toggles, can be really helpful if you want to skim through your lecture and quickly remind yourself of the rough ideas. It's basically a snapshot of your 100 or 200 page lecture. To summarize, focus on the thinking and the analyzing rather than simply copy-pasting. Number 5, know how mind maps work. Now, I'm just going to warn you again that all of this is purely experimental and it comes from personal experience rather than scientific research, so it may or may not work for you. What I've realized is that no single mind map can fit everything. Mind maps are like Google Maps. You see things depending on how far in or how far out you zoom. My mistake was that I started off a mind map trying to capture the big ideas, but ended up in the trap of trying to capture the finer information or the details or the bullet points. Like I said earlier, concepts only, but there's this insecurity of leaving information out, especially if mind maps is your only method of study, which is why, again, linear notes can be a really helpful method. So here's what you can do. For the past semester and a half, I've been mind mapping at 2 different Zoom settings, if you will. Chapter level is when I'm done looking through my lecture slides and analyzing everything that needs to be analyzed, whereas module level is really at the very end, maybe 1 day before my exams, just to see how everything fits together. There's no way you can fit 20, 30, or 50 decks of lecture slides into one mind map. You have to be really selective, and that's why concepts only. You could go for the finer details if you're making a chapter level mind map, but then you have to think to yourself, am I actually thinking, or am I just copy pasting information over from my lecture slides to my mind map? And this is something that AI can't do for you. Just to reiterate my first point, you have to go through the decision-making process yourself. So when I was studying about the ankle, I first made this set of AI-generated notes. I divided them into chronic conditions and acute conditions, and I thought, great, I compartmentalized it. This should make it easier for me to learn and apply. Turns out, I really struggled with it. So what I did next was I tried to delve deeper and started writing out the mechanism of injury, the symptoms, and then I realized, wait, I'm just copy pasting from my deck of slides. This isn't actually helping me. There's no linking to my kinesiology or my anatomy. So I started making linear notes. I analyzed each condition one by one, tried to link them to my anatomy, the kinetic chain, and once that condition made sense, I tried linking it with other conditions just to see how it all works. In the end, I felt a lot more confident about the information, even though my mind map was only 10 words. This is what Dr. Justin Sung means, I believe. My knowledge and analysis of these conditions is what led me to making such a small and neat chapter level mind map. And if I wanted to trace my thinking, all my analysis is in my linear notes. The next tip is to be flexible. No, I'm not asking you to start stretching, although that is really good. By flexible, I mean adapt to your modules. What I realized in the past year is that every module has a unique approach. Of course, there are some modules that might have similar approaches, but you can't throw the same study method at every module and expect it to work. Some modules require to look at the big picture and then zoom into the finer details. Others may do the right opposite. You start small and you slowly expand out to, in my case, other body structures or how a certain condition or a certain muscle links to the kinetic chain. So what I would suggest is asking your professors how to approach a certain module. Some modules can be extremely dense. So what worked for me was attacking the information from different directions until it all made sense. Let me give you an analogy. Think of it as trying to solve a puzzle. You start off with the corner piece and you slowly expand towards the center, followed by the sides, and it all starts to come together. Similarly, you can pick just one part of the topic and slowly expand from there on to other parts of the chapter or maybe even other chapters to see how they fit. But sometimes that doesn't work because of how dense or intricate the connections are. And it feels like everything is connected to everything and you're just confused and frustrated at how are you going to try to figure this out. So a different approach would be trying to find the corner pieces and then trying to form a border. And once your border is ready, you can work your way towards the center until the whole puzzle finally connects. This is what I mean by trying to attack the information from different directions. I don't know if this method has a proper name, but this is something that just works for me. In short, don't be too confident of your methods. You have to adapt. Number 7, deep encoding. Recently, I watched this video by Dr. Justin Sung and oh my goodness, it blew my mind. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to check it out. This video single-handedly saved me from burning out and made studying fun for me. The key idea is simple. If you want to remember something, you have to form connections. In your brain, information exists as a mesh, a web. Everything is connected to everything. The more you connect a new idea with what you already know, the higher the chances of you retaining it. And it is a conscious effort. It's going to be tough and you'll feel like reverting back to your old ways of trying to look at information in isolation instead of consciously looking for connections. But you have to remind yourself that this Discomfort is good. If you want to dive deeper into that method, the link to that video will be in the description below. And I would highly suggest that you check it out. Number 8, trust your brain. This is important because sometimes we stress too much over forgetting things. Give your brain time to process, to form connections of its own. Make sure you're getting enough sleep because that's the time your brain starts to process things and moves it into long-term memory. The way your brain knows that something is important is by looking at how it connects to everything else you already know. So if you're constantly cramming in information, that too in isolation, you have a higher chance of forgetting it. But if you constantly make an attempt to form connections and you also leave it to your brain to form connections of its own, you'll be surprised how much you can remember and for how long you can remember. Sometimes I like to call it letting information marinate in my brain. Bonus tip, before an exam, start studying the material backwards. This will force your brain into forming connections. Okay, this has been a very heavy video, but that's all I have for today. Again, all of this comes from personal experience, so use these tips only if you're looking to experiment. And once again, all the links will be in the description below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.